who's going to run around and pick them up from you guys. The training video, I think it's over 20 hours in training. It's really a lot. I got a bit long-winded, but it actually starts out with the Windows Automated Installation Kit, goes into Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, Windows Deployment Services, System Center Configuration Manager, and I cover the integration of all the products as well. So it's really a very well-rounded, you get everything. But I tried to keep it down to like 45 minutes to an hour, so you can just take little chunks at a time. You don't have to sit down and listen to 20 hours of me talking at one time. That's not fun for anybody. All right, I've got 8:30. Mark, is this clock going to start on its own, or do I need to do something to it? Thank you. All right, guys, you are here to see the top 10 Windows Deployment Service most commonly made mistakes in the hopes that you won't make them. You can get things up and running in no time. It really takes about half a day to get WDS up and running, and that's creating an image and having a deployable image as well. So it's not difficult, but I am curious before we start, how many of you are already running WDS? Ooh, lots of you. All right. Now I'm worried I took out a couple of slides that might have been advantageous for you guys. And if I have time, I might put them back in. That's awesome, because usually I get like a quarter of the crowd that's running WDS. Now, out of you guys, how many are also running Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, MDT? Wow, about half the number that raised their hands originally. And at the very end, I'm going to tell you why it's really important, if you're not running MDT, why you want to be running MDT and integrating WDS and MDT together. We'll get to that. My name is Rhonda. I've been in IT for, this is my 30th year. I started back in 1982 when I joined the Navy. Spent 7 years in the Navy as an IT pro. Actually, it was a data processing technician back then. They don't even have that rating anymore. But that's kind of where I got started. I write articles for Windows IT Pro magazine. I'm a setup and deployment MVP and a desktop deployment product specialist. Now that DDPS, that's a certification you get when you take one exam. And that exam, all the information you need for that exam is on this training video. But that one exam, you have to know everything there is to know about Wake, WDS, MDT, and SCCM. So while it's only one exam to pass, it's a really big one, and there's lots of detailed questions that you have to know the answers to. Any consultants in the room? A few of you? The DDPS is a great way to go ahead and get a certification for deployment so that you can give out consulting services. Thank you. You can provide consulting services for deployment, which is, of course, a really hot topic right now with Windows 7 out. And before I dive in, I do have one more question for you. How many are still running XP? Client side, XP. I would say 90% of the crowd. That's wonderful. I want this deployment to last for a long time. How many of you were waiting for Windows 7 SP1 to come out before you started? I think a lot of people wait for that these days, which really kind of Windows 7, you could almost call it Vista SP, fill in whatever the number is. So it is the Vista kernel that has just been updated and is much, much more streamlined and better, much more driver support. What I'm going to cover is I'm going to start out with installation and configuration issues. And since so many of you already have it up and running, I'm not sure if you're going to run into this or not, but I am curious as to how many of you did run into some of these problems. I'm going to start with WDS and its services. Services like DHCP and DNS. Then we'll get into the Windows pre-installation environment, or WinPE, and talk about some of the problems you can run into with WinPE environments. Talk a little bit about Pixie Boot, and mainly this comes down to hardware, routers, switches, and how they can be misconfigured, and what the errors will look like. So when you see the error, you'll say, oh, I know what that problem is, and how to fix it. Talk a little bit about the WDS capture utility that allows you to create WIM images. And then we'll talk just a little bit about deploying images and some issues you can have, especially with multicast traffic. So I want to talk a little bit about multicast, what it provides for us, and also some of the problems that it provides for us as well, and how you can resolve those. First are the WDS requirements. There's a little bit of infrastructure required for WDS, which is different than the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. There's really no infrastructure requirements for MDT. So WDS is a little bit heavier when it comes to the requirements. You're going to have DHCP, DNS, an Active Directory domain, and an NTFS partition. So what I'm showing you here is I've got DHCP running on one server, Active Directory and DNS on another, and then WDS on yet a third server. I have a bare metal machine with no operating system whatsoever. So in a perfect world, what should happen is bare metal machine boots up, finds out he's a DHCP client, and gets his IP information from the DHCP server, along with any scope options like who the DNS server is. Next, he'll go over and talk to the DNS service, asking for a list of domain controllers, those good old SRV records. You're going to need those when you authenticate against the WDS server, which is the last machine that you connect to. And then I did mention you do have to have an NTFS partition to store your images on. Now, the types of images that can be stored on a WDS server, you have WIM images, Windows images, that's all that stands for, and you also have VHDs, virtual hard disk images, that can be stored on WDS. Has anybody started deploying VHDs from WDS yet? Anybody at all? Not one single person. Has anyone created a VHD? Okay, I'd say about 20, 25. Real quick side note, one of the things I like about VHDs is that it's the whole disk, so you can have multiple partitions inside one image. Where if you have a WIM image, you run ImageX to create that WIM image, you can only have one partition in each image. This is where it gets really fun, but you can have multiple images stored in a single WIM file. So if you have a server that has two partitions, maybe one partition you've got your hardware utilities on, and the other partition is where you put the operating system. You would have to create two images, and then I like to store both those images inside the same WIM file so I know they go along with each other. But that's kind of twice the work. So you're having to capture two images, and then you have to deploy two images to that server. So VHDs do make your life a little bit easier, where you can just say, give me a whole picture of the hard drive, all partitions, and that's one image. All right, so you know your infrastructure requirements. Next are the configuration items, and there's not a lot to configure for a WDS server. You're going to tell it where you want to store your images, which partition, which folder, and you can choose whatever folder name you'd like, or you can stick with the remote inst. And then there are some DHCP options, and I want to cover these just so you guys are aware of the problems you can run into when you're bringing up new DHCP servers or decommissioning old ones. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Pixie server settings. So the first thing I wanted to show you was just how simple it is if you haven't seen this. I've got a member server. I have WDS installed, but as you can see by the yellow yield sign, it's not configured. If I right-click and choose Configure Server, it tells me you need DHCP, DNS, Active Directory, and an NTFS partition. You can choose where I want to put my images, which of course I never put them on the same drive as my operating system. And then you'll only see this box if you are installing WDS or configuring WDS on a machine that's already running DHCP. Little problem we have there is that both services listed on UDP port 67, so there's a little bit of a problem, and I'm going to go through this in much more detail in just a couple minutes. But for now, I'm going to tell WDS to not listen on port UDP 67, and then I have to set up a DHCP option telling it when my clients ask for an IP address from the DHCP service, also tell them this machine is a WDS server. And the last configuration item is my Pixie server initial settings. Have any of you guys looked at the WDS documentation? Oh, about 4 of you, and I love it. Most of you were like this. Before it was like, yeah, I've done that, and everybody's like, in the WDS documentation, there's like 4 or 5 different names for the WDS server. They call it a TFTP server, a network boot program server, a Pixie server. It has so many different names, and when I first started going through the documentation, I thought, wow, I need 4 different servers to run just WDS, but they all referred to the exact same machine. They were just calling it different things throughout the documentation. So on this page, I'm telling my WDS service which clients it should respond to. So if I don't have any images set up, I might want to leave it set to don't respond to any client computers. I can tell it to respond to only known client computers, which those are pre-staged in Active Directory. If you're not familiar with known and unknown clients, I'm going to hit that a little bit later on, so you will know. And this is my favorite setting, respond to all client computers known and unknown, but for unknown clients that have not been pre-staged in Active Directory, I want to provide administrative approval. I'm going to leave this set to respond to all client computers, and I'm not choosing the second setting for this demo. And I'm not going to add any images to the server now. As you can see, we have finished with our configuration. So these are the nodes that you will have in WDS. Our boot images is where our WinPEs, Windows pre-installation environments, go. Installation images, those are our actual operating system images, WIMs and VHDs. And since nobody's tried to add a VHD, I want to mention, you can't do it within the snap-in. Has anyone played with WDS util, the command line utility? Okay, like 8, 10 people, and most of you have raised your hands in here that you're already running WDS. WDS util, the command line utility, can do about 4 billion things more than the snap-in allows you to do. So what I recommend is pipe the WDS util help file to a text file, print that out, and sit down for an hour and go through all those switches and find out which ones are going to be relevant for your environment. That tool can really, really do a lot for you. And we've also got where we would add our drivers, creating multicast transmissions, and pending devices, which I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes. I don't have any on this server. But the only thing I wanted to do here was show you how to configure WDS. And we're done with that box. All right. I promised I'd tell you a little bit more about DHCP. And who's ever heard of the DHCP DORA process? Anybody heard of DORA? Not Dora the Explorer, but DORA. One person, awesome. Usually nobody's heard of it. So, in a perfect world, a network trace would reveal 4 packets that get transferred between a DHCP client and the server. And I just call it DORA because it keeps it short and I can remember what they are that way. I like the little short acronyms. So here I've got a bare metal machine. He boots up, finds out he's a DHCP client, and he sends a discover packet over to the DHCP server. Really, he broadcasts it out. That's the D in DORA. The DHCP server says, oh, here's an IP address that you might like. That's the O. The client says, well, I'm going to request that you assign that IP address to my MAC address for the next 8 days if you're going to stick with defaults. And then an acknowledgement goes back to the client. So that's a perfect environment for DHCP. Now notice in this environment, I have DHCP and WDS running on the same machine. So what I should get next is I should get a list of WinPEs that I'm going to have a choice to boot from. I can have 32-bit WinPEs, I can have 64-bit WinPEs. We'll talk about architecture a little bit later. But I get a list of WinPEs to boot if there's more than one. If there's only one, that's the one that will be booted. Then I get a list of operating systems to install, and I can choose my operating system. So that's a perfect world with DHCP and WDS running on the same machine. But we do have 3 scenarios. WDS and DHCP on the same subnet, different servers. WDS and DHCP on different subnets, and WDS and DHCP on the same server. I didn't tell you the whole story, so I'll tell you the whole story. First of all, we're going to start with different servers on the same subnet. All this traffic is done by broadcast. So the discover packet goes out, and both DHCP and WDS are listening on UDP port 67. Now, Network Monitor is my favorite tool. I always turn on Network Monitor just to see what's going on under the hood because that's where you really find out what's happening. And what looks really strange is the DHCP server makes an offer of an IP address, and then the WDS server makes an offer too. But he doesn't have DHCP running on that machine, so it looks really strange that now you're getting a do-ra instead of a DORA. You're getting one discover going out and two offers coming back. And it looks peculiar when you look at a network trace saying, why is that WDS server sending out an offer? DHCP is not running on that. That's the WDS service doing that. And what he's doing is telling that bare metal machine, hey, I'm running WDS. I'm the one you want to talk to about images. The request goes back to the DHCP server, acknowledgement. You get your list of boot menus, and you get your list of operating system images to install. Everything works fine. Now, how many of you have one subnet? All your clients are on it, all your servers are on it. I think three people. So you can pretty much install it and you're good to go. But when you're on different subnets, remember this is all broadcast traffic. And of course, we don't allow for broadcast traffic to be traversed across routers, switches. It's the whole purpose mainly of putting those in. So our bare metal machine boots up. He sends out a discover packet to the DHCP server. And then the DHCP server gives him an IP address and also has option number 66 and 67 set. Option 66 tells it the name of the WDS server. Option 67 tells the client the name of the file it's supposed to boot. And that would be the Pixie boot program. Bare metal requests IP address be assigned to his Mac, and then an acknowledgement comes back from the DHCP server. He then contacts WDS, gets his WinPE menu and his OS image menu. WDS and DHCP on the same server. This is what you just saw me configure. And we got that one dialog box that came up and said, do not listen on UDP port 67, and also configure the Pixie client setting, option 60 in DHCP. And this is what that looks like. You got your discover packet. DHCP hands out an offer and also says, hey, here's option 60. It's configured with Pixie. Now, this is kind of strange. If you look at the data packet, it actually says Pixie client in it. So I guess it's saying you're a Pixie client. What it's actually doing is identifying the WDS server as the Pixie server. But the data in the packet physically says Pixie client. So he tells him that. We go through the request, the acknowledge, and then it does a discover and an offer again. So this is kind of a Dora-do. You get your discover, offer, request, acknowledge, then you get another discover and offer. This is where the client actually reads the information that that guy is the WDS server as well. So that looks a little bit strange in a trace also. Get your WinPE menu and your operating systems to choose from. If you install WDS on a server and then later you install DHCP, you can just go into the properties of your DHCP server and put 2 check marks in, do not listen on port 67, and configure DHCP option 60 to be Pixie client. You don't have to go into DHCP and configure the option if you don't want to. You can always go into DHCP and configure it, but this will do it for you. Now, I do a lot of consulting. I live in DC, and I've been doing a lot of consulting with federal agencies. It's always fun to go in and work for the government. But what I see a lot of times is some of these rather large environments, you've got different teams. So you've got an infrastructure team, you might have a deployment team, and then you've got the big old management team. And I think their job is to make sure no one communicates with anyone else. I'm convinced of this. And what I've seen is the infrastructure team sometimes will take down a DHCP server, bring up a new one, and then not configure the options properly. And what I saw at the last, I'm not going to mention the name, what I saw at the last place, I went in, I want to say it was October of last year, and they hadn't been able to Pixie boot since February. Almost an entire year they couldn't Pixie boot, it was broken. The problem was the infrastructure team had decommissioned a DHCP server, brought up a new one, and didn't configure the scope options for WDS. It took all of 20 seconds to go in and fix it, but I was amazed that this had been down since February. So they just stopped using WDS. That's when they started using MDT, which I thought was interesting. WDS and DHCP, I'll just show you these real quick. I'm now on my 2008 R2, might even be SP1. This is my domain controller, DNS server. And if we open DHCP, now these options can be set at the scope level, at the server level. Doesn't really matter, it's just however you would like to do it. And as you can see for my server options, I have option 60 already set because I am running WDS on this same machine. If I want to configure additional options, this is where you would pop right down to 66 and 67. I told you 66 is the WDS server name, and you put in the FQDN, so deploy.deployment.com. And then 67 is the boot file name. Well, it's got to be the complete path to it. And this is what that's going to look like. We go into Windows Explorer. I've got this on my E drive in the remote install folder. Temp, go down to x86. And I don't like to do a lot of typing if I don't have to. Where'd he go? Oh, here we are. And we'll just grab this. So that's what the path needs to look like. It has to be not just the name of the file that they're supposed to pixie boot, but the complete path to get to it. So that's configuring options 66 and 67 for you. All right. Anybody have any issues with DHCP setting up WDS? Nobody? Awesome. Awesome. It's finally well documented. Is one method better than another? There are some issues you can run into with older machines that don't understand these options properly. So you might need to have IP helpers configured. There are some additional things that you can do, but it's based on how old are your clients and what can they do as far as DHCP is concerned. So Microsoft, this is really a last-ditch effort, is setting these options. IP helpers are much more reliable, and all clients can benefit from those. All right, let's take a peek at WDS and DNS, because this one kind of blew me away. I'll tell you that the way I ran into this problem was I had about 10 minutes before one of my sessions was supposed to start at TechEd Europe last year, and I couldn't get WDS to work. And you know, you're not thinking straight at that point anyway, so I was like panicked that I couldn't get it to work. And one of my friends, who's also a deployment, set up a deployment MVP, was in the room. He's like, "Rhonda, it's your DNS ports." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Thank goodness he was there, because I just kind of got in a frazzle and couldn't remember what I was supposed to do to fix it. So what can happen is you can break the boot process if you have WDS and DNS installed on the same machines. The problem you run into is DNS wants to bind to all the ports the WDS needs. And you can run into this in one of two ways. You can either have DNS installed first, which already has the ports bound, and then install WDS, which can't have access to those ports now. Or if you've installed MS-0837, that can also introduce the same problem. The way to resolve that is to go in and change the ports that WDS listens on. Let DNS have them and just change the ports that WDS is going to listen on. To do that, we'll open WDS on my domain controller. I'm going to go to Properties. And on the Network tab, instead of the 64,000 to 65,000, you could just change that to 64.1, 65.1. That would resolve the issue of your clients not being able to boot. All right, that's the only DNS issue I've run into up to this point. The next topic is your Pixie boot and problems you can run into with Pixie boot. You guys all know Pixie is a protocol extension of DHCP. It was created by Intel a long time ago. The goal is just to perform a network boot, And here's where I like to bring up some of the acronyms that are used in the documentation, so when you do go back and look at the documentation, it's not brand new to you. But it's supposed to find and download a network boot program, that's your NBP, from a network boot server, that's your NBS. From the client, it should get an IP address from DHCP, discover who the network boot server is. Remember, that's just the WDS server. We're just giving it a different name now. And then download the network boot program using TFTP and execute it locally on the client. Problems you can run into. All of this traffic is local. So UDP port 67 and UDP port 4011, that's your TFTP Pixie traffic port. So you can tell from the error messages that you get if you didn't get an IP address from DHCP, or if during the Pixie process you get an error message that states it can't access port 4011 or didn't receive any data from port 4011. That's going to tell you it's your TFTP issue for the Pixie boot. I mentioned your Pixie server settings, and I also talked a little bit about known and unknown clients. So I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of what a known and an unknown client is. I've already talked to you about this setting. This is my favorite setting. Respond to all client computers, both known and unknown, but for unknown machines, require administrative approval. Known machines are simply pre-staged in Active Directory. So they've renamed it. In RIS, we simply called it pre-staged. Now with WDS, we're calling it known clients. So when you create a computer object in Active Directory, which is where I am here, Active Directory users and computers, and you give it a computer name, click Next, and then on the Managed page, you tell it this is a managed computer, and you input either the GUID of the computer or the MAC address with no dashes. Now, MAC addresses are only 12 characters, and you need to have 32 in here. So when I first got started with WDS, I'd have to sit here and count 20 zeros. All you need to do is keep putting zeros in the front until this button, the next button, becomes black and selectable. And then you've got 32 characters in there. When you hit 33, it goes gray again. Click Next. And then the last thing you can do is you can tell each client which WDS server you want them to go to. Or you can say just allow for any WDS server. And yes, this screenshot was taken from a 2008 R2 server, and notice what it says. Any available remote installation server. It means WDS. I'm sure they're going to change that at some point. From the client, how this should look. This is a known client Pixie boot. Press the F12. For an unknown client, this is what they should see. They get a pending request ID, and then they're going to sit here. Now, look at this screen first of all. You get a lot of information on this screen. You get to find out IP information, IP address of the DHCP server who gave you the IP. You find out what your pending request ID is. And then there's this little field down here for message from administrator. You guys see that? Has anybody gotten a message in there yet? Has anybody attempted to put a message in there? Anyone? It'd be nice if somebody, one person, you attempted or you got it to work. You attempted. I'm going to tell you a secret. It took me a year and a half to figure out how to do that. I asked everyone at Microsoft that I could talk to. I talked to WDS PMs. I'm like, how do I get a message in this silly little box? Nobody could answer it. I just happened to be at Tech Ed, and I sat down and did some of those hands-on labs. And I wanted to jump up and say, I found it, I found it. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been looking for this for a year and a half, and I just happened upon it in one of those labs. It's a WDS util command. There's no way to do it in the snap-in. And the command is like a paragraph to type out. So it's lots of fun. You guys can email me directly if you want to get the command. I can always send that to you. And I think I've got business cards for anyone who wants the email address, or I think my email address, if it's not in the slide deck, I'll make sure it's in there for you guys. So you've got the message for administrator here. If this is an unknown machine, you might want to tell them what phone number to call. Call the help desk. Tell them that you're sitting at this screen. Help desk is going to say, what's your pending request ID? And then figure out what they can do with it. Now, it checks in at about every 15 seconds to find out if the request has been approved or rejected. And every 15 seconds, you get this little dot down here. I found out that that keeps going and going when I went to lunch one day and left it running. And I came back, and I had filled the entire buffer with dots because I was gone for so long. So it'll keep checking in with the WDS server to see if anybody has gone in and said, allow that pending request, or deny the pending request. If they allow it, then you can continue and you get your operating system images. If they deny it, then the machine will reboot and try to boot from the hard drive if there's anything on it. If you don't have a network boot server or did not get the network boot program, this is what that error is going to look like. And notice up here, we're talking about port 4011. In that scenario, I would turn on Network Monitor and find out what was going on. Find out, am I getting the information? Am I getting it to my routers? My router stopping it? Firewall issues someplace? Usually it's a misconfigured switch or router is what this issue comes down to. And it's been so much fun because I've had people argue, oh no, I'm positive that's configured correctly. And I'm like, well, just humor me. Go take a look at that. And they'll go take a look at it and I don't hear back from them. I'm like, that was it. So some Pixie issues. IP helpers, we talked about that. They need to be configured properly on your switches and routers. Older machines with older Pixie ROMs can have issues with setting DHCP options. They don't read them properly. So that's where you'd want to make sure that you're using IP helpers instead of that. And those are configured properly to forward the broadcast information to the proper servers. All right, the next topic is WinPEs, Windows pre-installation environments. I think everybody's familiar with WinPEs now. Everybody pretty familiar with WinPEs? I used to have to explain it's the new DOS. Kind of gets the machine booted up, connected to the network. Really, it's the Windows 7 kernel, and they've just ripped gigantic chunks out of it, so it's not a full-blown operating system anymore. They've kind of crippled it. So all it's supposed to do is get that machine booted, connected to the network, and its job is done. Now, you can map drives from a WinPE to a server, which is good news, right? Because you're going to want to pull down an image from that server. But you cannot map a drive to a WinPE machine. The server service has been yanked out, so you're never going to map a drive between two WinPE machines or directly to one from another machine. Now, you can create your own custom WinPEs using the Windows Automated Installation Kit, the Wake's Copy PE utility. You can create a 32, you can create a 64-bit WinPE. We'll talk a little bit later on about when you would use one versus the other. But there's a big difference between a WinPE that you create and one that you can find on a Windows 7 or Server 2008, DVD, or ISO. Now, on that DVD or in an ISO file, you'll find a sources folder. Inside the sources folder, your WinPE will be named boot.wim. Big difference between these two. I'm going to show you the difference in just a second. I've got a couple of them mounted up, and I wanted to show you what the big difference is between them. But which WinPE you should use? You should always use the latest and greatest. So Server 2008 R2 SP1 or Windows 7 SP1 would be the latest and greatest boot.wim. If you use an older Vista boot.wim, well, you can't install Windows 7 using that. So you want to make sure you always get the latest and greatest. If you do attempt to install a Windows 7 image using a Vista boot.wim, this is what you're going to get. So if you ever get this nice little hex 80070002 error message, you know I've got a couple of people shaking their head. Yeah, I've seen that before. You're using an old Vista WinPE. Now, how many of you guys have played around with DISM, Deployment Image Servicing and Management Tool? Yeah, if you're running WDS without MDT, you should be pretty familiar with good old DISM now. So DISM is the tool that allows us to mount, unmount, and manage our images. So we can mount an image to an empty folder, which I've got a couple of them mounted. If you haven't seen a mounted image before, I'll show you. It looks just like regular folders on the machine. You can copy and paste to and from them. And it also allows you to inject drivers, patches, things like that. So what I have is the first thing I want to show you. I have a WinPE.wim. That's one I've created. And then I have the boot.wim off of a Windows 7 SP1 DVD. So I'm going to use my DISM command. You can see if you haven't used DISM before, these commands are really long, so I like to pre-stage them so I don't have to sit up here and try to type all this out. I'm going to tell it to get me the information about a WinPE that I've created. And you can see there's only one image inside that WIM file because there's only one image index, and that's number 1. Let's compare that to the boot.wim, which is off the Windows 7 DVD. How many images do I have inside that WIM file? 2, you guys see anything important about that second? Like the name gives it away. Microsoft Windows Setup. Oh, that actually runs the setup program. Well, this is what it looks like. I've mounted image index number 1, which is the only one from the WinPE I've created, and then I mounted image index number 2 from the boot.wim. So if we compare those, I've mounted my WinPE into an empty folder named WinPE. I have program files, users, and Windows folder. And then I mounted the boot.wim into a folder named boot. And notice, that's the important guy right there, setup.exe. Has anybody tried to create your own WinPE? You import it into WDS as a boot image, and then you go to your client, you pixie boot, you choose that WinPE, and you get this. This is one of the most common mistakes I have people asking me. So I've created my own WinPE, I put it on the WDS server, I can choose it, it boots up, and I'm done. I never get my list of operating system images to install. Because this is what you'll get if you boot the boot.wim off of the Windows 7 DVD. And this automatically launches WDS client. So from here, I'm able to click Next, authenticate to the WDS server, and get a list of my operating system images to deploy. That's what you want to see. All right, any questions on WinPEs? Has anyone yet created a WinPE and put your troubleshooting tools in it? You can actually inject tools using DISM into your WinPE and then store it on the WDS server. So you get out to a client machine, you're like, this machine's not acting right. I think maybe there's a rootkit on it. Well, you're not going to find a rootkit with the OS up and running. So you could pixie boot that machine, load up your WinPE that has your rootkit detector in it, run that on the machine, clean it up. You didn't have to schedule another visit to go out there because you forgot to bring some CD with you or some set of tools, whatever you keep them on. So it's really kind of a nice idea to have your tools built into a custom WinPE that you've built and put that guy on the WDS server. And you can boot it with all your tools. You don't have to carry things around with you as much. Now, WDS is a little different with WinPE and its architectures than MDT is, so I do like to talk about this. And it's actually backwards from the way it was in 2008. What I mean by this is if you boot a 32-bit WinPE, that client, when you get your list of operating system images to install, you'll get a list of all the 32 and 64-bit OSs you can install. If you boot a 64-bit WinPE, you're only going to get a list of your 64 bits. In 2008, it was opposite. If you booted a 32, you could only see your 32, because if your machine is only a 32-bit architecture, you're never going to install a 64-bit OS. But if you had a 64-bit machine, you could choose to install a 32-bit OS on it. So now they've kind of flipped that. With MDT itself, when you update your deployment share, it creates WinPEs for you. And the default is it'll create a 32 and a 64-bit WinPE. If you boot the 32-bit WinPE from MDT, you only see 32-bit operating systems to deploy. If you boot the 64, you only see 64-bit OSs to deploy. Now, I've done this to myself a number of times where I've chosen the wrong WinPE, and it boots up, and I don't get the list of operating system images I'm expecting to see. Anybody else done this? A few of you. I see some heads nodding, about 4 or 5. So just know that if you don't see the operating system image, chances are you booted the wrong WinPE. Shut the machine down, boot it up, get the right WinPE. All right, this is a big topic. And what I wanted to do is make sure you guys had this all in one location. I hate when I have to go to a doc to find certain permissions in one doc, then I've got to go to another one. You've got all these links, and you're chasing them all over TechNet, trying to figure out what permissions are allowed to be set up or how you can lock permissions down on a WDS server. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I did want you to have them all in one place so that you can go back and look at your permissions. Now, what I've seen in a lot of environments, domain admin always works, right? So let's just use the domain admin account. We know that's going to work. Let's just always use domain admin, especially in smaller environments. People just always use the domain admin account. But there are places where those credentials are stored in clear text, both with WDS and MDT. So I like to tell people, don't ever use domain administrator credentials for your deployment solution. You really want to lock it down at least a little bit. I've listed your default permissions here: local administrator on the WDS server, full control of that remote install folder. That is the default folder name for where you're going to store your images. I've left everything to the defaults here, so it might be a little bit more familiar to you. And you also have full control permissions on HKey local machine system. The domain admin, this is the domain where the WDS server is a member, has full control permissions on the service control point in Active Directory for the WDS server. The service control point is simply an attribute that you can see in ADC Edit. Underneath your server name, it will say service control point and identifies this machine as a WDS server. And the reason I bring that up is because if you ever have error message about WDS servers and null server references, it could be that that attribute is empty, and you would need to open ADSI Edit, scroll down to your OU, open up the server, look under the properties for the SCP, the service control point. That attribute should be probably the only attribute underneath it. There's not a lot that are set up as attributes. Enterprise admins. And like I said, I'm not going to go through each one of these. Admin approval. This is where we have an unknown client, and it's sitting at that Pixie boot screen with a pending request. So what users can actually go into the WDS snap-in, go down to pending devices, and get a list of all the machines that are out there sitting in that state, in the unknown state. Who's allowed to right-click that and choose approve or reject? So the computer account is actually created using the server's authentication token, not a user's. And the WDS server $service has to have create computer account objects on the containers where the OUs, where you're going to actually have your approved pending computers. To allow someone to allow or reject, they have to have read-write to the remote install management folder. There's this little teeny tiny database, and whenever somebody is sitting in that unknown computer state, that pending request is inside this database, little MDB guy. And so that's where they need to have permissions to either allow or reject. Joining machines to the domain. This is one of my favorite. So what's the default when you set up a delegated task to allow someone to join a machine to the default, to the domain? What are the two things they can do? Anybody know? I bet you guys know, and as soon as I say it, you'll be like, oh, of course. They can create computer objects and join machines to the domain. So what happens if you don't want them to be able to create computer objects? Because you're going to lock down your deployments. You've got one group of people that create computer objects where they're supposed to be in your OU structure. And then you're going to allow a different user to actually join that machine to the domain, and that's all they can do. They can't create a computer object. In one agency where I was, we set this up as kind of a way so that the users had no choice as to what they were going to name their new Windows 7 machine. We were keying it off of employee information. And so we created the computer objects, forcing them that if you don't name it what we've told you to name it, well, you can't join the domain. So it's kind of a security and also kind of a way for the help desk to get some common naming conventions out there. But there are a couple of things you need to do. You have to set the join rights, and there's 2 steps to this. Notice where I am. We're in the registry here. We're going to go all the way down to HKey local machine system, current control set, services, WDS server, providers, WDS Pixie, providers, vinyl service, auto approve, and then with the architecture, you have to do it for 32 and for 64, so you'd see an x86 and an x64. And the name of this key is going to be join rights. It should already exist. It's a D word. And the value of 0 is set to join only, and 1 is full. By default, it's set to 1 full, which means allow people to create computer objects and join machines to the domain. So the first thing we're going to do is go in and set it to the join rights value to 0. The second thing you're going to do is go down and tell it which user or group is allowed to join machines to the domain. So we're in the same place in the registry. The name of this key is user, the type is a reg size, and the value is you can either enter a group name or specific usernames for which users are allowed to join machines to the domain. So there's not really an easy way to go through custom delegated tasks and break this apart. In fact, there's no way that I know of to break this up when you're doing delegated tasks. The only way I know to set this is to go into the registry and do it this way. Some common permissions that are out there. Now we're mixing here NTFS permissions along with WDS permissions. So to pre-stage a computer, in Active Directory users and computers, you can go in and create a custom task to delegate. They need to have write all properties on your computer objects. If you want to allow someone to add or remove images or image groups from WDS, they need to have full control on that remote install folder, within that, images and image group. Now, if you're not familiar with what an image group is, let me just explain that real quick. When you add an operating system image to the WDS snap-in, it'll ask, well, what image group do you want to put that in? And the cool thing about having image groups is single instancing takes place within the instance group. So what I mean by that is I've got an Windows 7 32-bit operating system image with all the marketing applications in it. I put that inside one image group. Now I created a second Windows 7 32-bit, very important, 32-bit image, and it has all the applications for research and development. I put that inside the same image group. Well, single instancing will not store redundant files. So what it does, it kind of wakes up and it looks at every single file you're going to put in that image group. If it already exists, it just puts a pointer to it. It doesn't store the same file over and over and over again like the entire core operating system files. But it doesn't do you any good to put a 32-bit and a 64-bit in the same image group. You can, but you're not going to get any benefit from it. So make sure you put 64-bit images in one image group and 32 in another. And that'll help you save a lot of hard drive space for your file storage. If you'd like to allow someone to disable an image, they need read-write for the image within WDS. If you want to allow them to add a boot image, that's adding your WinPEs, they need read-write for the remote install folder, and within that, the boot folder. Read-write on the remote install and admin only if you're upgrading from 2003 server. Did anybody upgrade RIS to WDS? A couple of you. I'd say about 5 of you. Any problems? Are you still sending out RI prep images? Anybody? Converted everything to WIMs? All right. If you want to allow people to remove boot images, read-write on, again, remote install and boot folder. These are your permissions if you want to allow people to manage the properties of an operating system image. Convert an RI prepped image. Create discover or capture images. The discover image, if you're not familiar with that, if Pixie Boot is not allowed in your environment, you can create a discover image, put that on a USB or a CD, and boot your clients. That's actually performing the Pixie Boot without having to go across the network to do it. The capture image, that's the WDS capture utility that allows you to capture an image of that local machine, and I'm going to give you more on that in just a second. These are your permissions in the registry if you'd like to allow someone to create multicast transmissions. All right. Number 5, top WDS common issues, renaming and moving your WDS server. Well, if you rename the machine or you move it from one domain to another, you have to uninitialize and reinitialize the WDS service. It won't just come up and start running. And to do that, you've got 2 WDS util commands. You'll go out to a command prompt and run these guys. You could also do an ampersand in between the two and run it on one line if you'd like to. But that's how you would reinitialize your WDS service. Number 4, creating an image to deploy. I've run into this myself. So you get a machine up and running. You've got Windows 7, 32, 64-bit, whatever you choose on it. You've got all your applications. And then you want to create an image of this machine. Well, we have to sysprep it and shut it down. Now, how come sysprep, the default, is to restart the machine? Who in here wants to sysprep a box and have it come right back up again? And you have to go through the sysprep mini setup wizard, and you can't sysprep all day long. I think you only get like 5 syspreps on a machine. So I always change that to sysprep the machine and shut down. Now, if you're sysprepping XP or 2003, then you're going to need to make sure you use the reseal switch. If you're doing Windows 7, Server 2008, you're going to use the generalize. If you forget the reseal or the generalize switch, which I have, when you do boot your WDS capture utility, has anyone created a WDS capture utility? About 7 people. I'm not going to do the whole thing because it does take a while for it to add everything back in, but I want to show you what I'm at least talking about here. We're done with these guys. I'm in WDS. I'm going to go down to my boot images. So you would add a WinPE, and like I said, I always add the WinPE from the sources folder from a DVD, get that boot.wim, and then you can right-click and choose to create a capture image. Now, the capture image is just a modified WinPE. And when you boot that WinPE, it automatically starts WDS capture. And that's what you just saw on that slide, which I'll go back to in a second. But that's the point. It automatically runs it for you. When you tell it to create a capture image, it's going to create a WinPE. It's going to put it wherever folder I tell it to put it, name it what I tell it to name it, and then it takes 3, 5, 7 minutes, depending on the speed of your machine and what else is going on, especially in a virtual environment. And then I have to import that back into the WDS server as a boot image. Now, when I pixie boot my clients, I can choose that boot image, and it'll automatically launch WDS capture for me. If you do launch that, and there's no volume to capture, you can't just type it in. You can't say, oh, I wanted to capture volume C, or I wanted to capture volume D. If there's not a volume listed here, you didn't do your sysprep right. Boot the machine back up, sysprep it again, and this time use the generalize or the reseal switch, WDS capture, you should get a volume to capture. And one other note on the WDS capture utility, the screen makes it appear as though you have a choice. You can either store your new WIM image locally on that machine, or you can put it on the WDS server. You don't really have a choice. You have to tell it where to put it locally, and also that you want to put it on the WDS server. That one took me a couple days to figure out, because I'm like, I just want to put it locally on the machine. Which takes me to a point, why do I want to create an image of a machine and put it on the local machine? Has anybody played with ImageX? A few of you. So running ImageX, I can create an image. I have one volume, the C volume. Create an image of C and put it on C. I do it all the time, and it's smart enough to know to not include the WIM image inside the WIM file. So you don't have to worry about it. You just have to make sure you have enough hard drive space to create that image on the same volume. Now, if you are using ImageX and you want to import this operating system image into a WDS server, you better use the flag switch, or it won't import into WDS. It'll error out when you attempt to import it. So what's the flag switch? It's one of those little undocumented features. The flag switch tells it what edition of operating system you're using, Ultimate Enterprise. So in the ImageX command, you would do an ImageX space / capture, tell it the volume you want to capture, where you'd like to put it, space / flags, and then in quotes tell it Enterprise, Ultimate, Professional, whatever your edition is. And then WDS can read what edition it is and allow you to import that. All right, you've gone to all the trouble of pre-staging your clients in Active Directory, users and computers. but some of the settings aren't taking effect as if it were a pre-staged client. Some of the problems you can run into: pre-staging using a MAC address, swapping that NIC to another machine, so now the MAC address is different, replacing the NIC, MAC address is different, or having multiple computer objects pre-staged in Active Directory for the one same machine. They're in different OUs or containers. The problem there is the first one found is what's going to be used. So if it's not pre-staged properly because some other admin was helping you out and it found their misconfigured pre-staged object, then it's not going to work properly. Now we're getting down to the bottom of the barrel here. Multicast issues. How many of you guys are running multicast? Not that many. I'd say about 25 people. I want to give you a little information on multicast. With Server 2008, we had multicast was brand new to WDS. And the purpose was you could have multiple clients all getting the same data at the same time. So what happens is when you're doing multicast, all your clients come over to the WDS server and they ask for a multicast IP address, which in the first octet it's going to be 239 or higher. So they have a regular IP address they got from DHCP. That's not the one I'm talking about. They get an additional IP address that is a multicast IP address from WDS. And now when multicast occurs, instead of the WDS server taking packet 1 of 70,000 packets to deploy an image and sending that to client 1, and then creating packet 1 and sending that to client 2, packet 1 to client 3, instead of doing unicast, it can now create packet 1 and send it to all the multicast IPs that are out there. So they can all get that image at the same time. It's a lot less overhead on your servers. But what's really cool is, let's say that you're halfway through getting an image out to 15 machines. They just got packet number 35,000. And I'm not exaggerating here. It's a lot of packets to deploy an image. So they just got packet 35,000. That 16th machine comes up and says, hey, I want that same image. The first packet it will get is packet 35,001. The cool thing here is WDS is just doing file copies is all that's happening with your images now. So who cares if it starts in the middle? At the end, WDS will say, hey, do I need to start again? He shouts out. And that client's going to say, yeah, I need to get the first half of that from you. So WDS will start again. Well, in 2008, we had one stream of multicast traffic. And what was wrong with that? Your slowest client would dictate the speed that everybody else got the image. And it might not even be a client that was slowing things down. It might be a switch or a router someplace that was misconfigured or misbehaving and slowing it down for everybody. So issues you can run into is what version of IGMP is supported on your switches and routers. Version 3 is what needs to be supported for Server 2008 R2 multicast. And what's nice about the new multicast is there are 3 streams of multicast traffic not by default. There are 3 streams you can tell it to use. Let me show you where you tell it to use 1 or 3. I'm going to go back to the properties in WDS, go to the multicast tab. These are the IP addresses that are handed out. And every WDS server uses these same IP addresses by default. So think about that for a second. If you have multiple WDS servers handing out the same multicast IP addresses, you could run into some multicast issues. So you need to make sure that you go in and configure your multicast IP addresses to be different on each WDS server. The default setting is to keep all multicast clients in a session at the same speed. Now, why would that be the default? It's so much better to have 3 different sessions now: fast, medium, and slow. Every client starts out in the fast. There's an algorithm within the client's registry that will dictate what the speed is for bandwidth. And you can set that if you choose. You can set it through a group policy and tell it, if it drops below this speed, take that guy out of the fast, put him into the medium stream. If he drops below another threshold, put him into the slow. So it's nice that you can do that. You can drop a client from fast to medium to slow. But the same story is true within that stream. The slowest client will still dictate the speed for everybody else. When you do have clients that are coming in with multicast, you know, there weren't that many people that raised their hands there on who's doing multicast right now, so let me just show you very quickly how you would create a multicast transmission. You can do it one of two ways. You can either come down to multicast transmissions and say, create a multicast transmission. I'm just going to name this Atlanta. And then you choose which operating system you want to be multicasted. So it's the OS image itself. It's not like you're turning on a great big switch to WDS saying, okay, multicast everything now. You have to tell it, multicast this OS image. So then you could choose from your image groups and then set up which one you wanted to multicast. And then you have two different types of multicast. You have autocast and scheduled cast. Now, autocast is what I just explained. You could have a client in midstream start getting the transfer. Scheduled cast doesn't work like that. Scheduled cast, you would tell it, on this date at this time, begin multicasting this image. Or when X number of clients connect to you, maybe you're setting up a classroom environment and you've got 25 machines. Well, when all 25 machines have checked in with WDS, that's when the multicast begins. And you can set those numbers here. This is your certain number, and this is at a specific date and time. But when you do a scheduled cast, you can't have clients come in midstream and get the image. They will not get the image unless they started when everybody else did. So there's a difference between autocast and scheduled cast. That's one way to create a multicast transmission. The other way to do it is to drill down to find your actual OS image that you'd like to multicast. Right-click and tell it to create a multicast transmission. And then that screen looks the same. Same settings there. So once you've created a multicast transmission and you have clients that are now deploying that image using multicast, this is what it could look like. This is the WDS snap-in. I've expanded my server. I've opened multicast transmissions, and I've highlighted the multicast transmission I'd like to take a look at. And notice over here I have 2 clients that are currently participating in the multicast. And I know it's kind of small, but check out all of those column headings. There's all kinds of information up here with these column headings. If you have 50, 60, 70 clients all doing multicast and you want to find out, well, which one's the fastest, which one's the slowest, you could click the column heading of the transfer rate. Which one's using the most memory? Click memory utilization. And it'll go through and it'll set everything in ascending order. If you click the column heading again, it changes everything to descending order. So on that transfer rate column, hit that twice and your slowest client's going to pop up to the top. Well, if it's really, really dragging everything down, you can right-click on that client and tell it to bypass multicast, which will kick him out of the multicast transmission, and then he's going to unicast with the server all by himself. Or you can say, no, this guy's really, there's something wrong with that machine, I need to go troubleshoot it. So you can tell it to disconnect, which would end the deployment for that one machine. Yes? Can you export that data out? I'm not aware of any way to export that data out, and it's only here as long as the clients are performing the deployment. As they complete, they drop out of it. There might be something in WDS util that you could use that I haven't looked at yet, but that's the only place I could direct you. All right, the very last one, in my humble opinion, the biggest mistake people make when using WDS is they don't integrate it with the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. Now, why do I say that? We've got 3 different kinds of images. You have fat, thin, and hybrid images. A fat image has your operating system in it and all your applications. Well, you want to change one version of an application, or you want to toss some more drivers in there and take out some old drivers. What do you have to do? All those people who raised their hand when I asked if you use DISM, you've done this. Because DISM is the tool you're going to have to use. That's how you're going to inject drivers if you're using WDS. So that FAT image, you just want to change the version of an application, you got to blast the image out, you have to change the version, you got to create a new image. There's no way to just change the version of the application inside that image like you can with MDT. MDT makes this a piece of cake. So FAT images, that's got everything in it, much more difficult to manage. That's where we started. Everybody started using FAT images years and years ago. And then we decided, well, that's bad. It's too much management. You have to create a new image every month, practically, for new patches coming out. And that took a couple days sometimes to get that new image. So we all switched and said, oh, no, let's do thin images. So thin images just have the operating system in it. And then you deploy your applications using SCCM, group policies, just some other method. And we decided, no, we don't like that either. Let's mix the two. That's where we got hybrid. So a hybrid image has your operating system in it and usually your corporate applications that don't change often, like Office, Adobe Reader, things that don't change the version every 2 weeks, like Silverlight and Flash and some of those fun things. So hybrid images are easier to manage, but still more difficult when you put them inside WDS. So when you import a WIM image into WDS, who knows how to find out what drivers are in that? 2 people. There's no way within WDS to say, list all the drivers inside that WIM image. You can export the image out, use DISM to mount it, and then use the DISM get driver information command. And then, I know everybody loves documentation. Whenever I do that, I always pipe the output to a text file, print it, put it in a book, and that's my documentation for that image and what drivers exist inside that image. Now, as long as you don't make any changes, you don't need to re-import it back into WDS. But if you do make changes, then you're going to have to re-import the image back into WDS. This is what MDT looks like if you haven't seen it. The tool is called the Deployment Workbench. And notice the nodes. Under my deployment share, I've got a node for applications. I have one for operating systems, out-of-box drivers, packages. Packages are your operating system patches and language packs. Task sequences. Task sequences, this is the coolest part of MDT. So I can add Windows 7 as an operating system. I can add 27 different applications, and I can add 400 drivers. And then I create a task sequence that says, go grab Windows 7 Ultimate, that's the OS, grab those 12 applications, and grab those 27 drivers. That's my task sequence. That's what I deploy. So how easy do you think it would be to make a little tiny change? It takes 2 seconds to create a task sequence. I hadn't planned on demoing this, but I am going to because I've got a couple extra minutes here. It does take a few seconds to open the first time. I usually get impatient. It opens like 17 times by the time I've opened it for the first time. With the old version of MDT, it actually broke it if you opened multiple copies of it, but this version it doesn't. I'm going to open a deployment share that has some stuff in it. All right, just to show you some of the stuff that you might have. I have a few applications in here, all kinds of Silverlight, Office is in here somewhere, Trin Office Scan. There's tons of applications, both third-party and homegrown applications. I have some operating systems that have been added. Some of these are custom FAT images. Some of these are from the install.wim off of a Windows 7 DVD. And that's one of the nice things is you can get just the bare bones OS out of that install.wim and put it into MDT. And then because of your task sequences, when you grab just one OS and a couple applications, it makes it so easy to make changes later on. So I've got drivers, tons and tons of drivers. I'm going to show you how easy it is to create a task sequence. We'll give it an ID and a name. I'm trying. And then it's got some built-in templates for you. I'm going to go ahead and just choose the client task because this would be a desktop deployment. So I'll choose the client task sequence. It also has built-in templates for server deployments. It does some fantastic things for servers. It can actually deploy a server operating system, and you can tell it, oh yeah, make that guy a domain controller, and here's the DC I want it to replicate with for the first time. You can tell it to make it a DNS server. Here's your DNS zone information. Make it a DHCP server. Here's your scope information. And what's really cool is don't just look at deployment as the first time you're going to get an image out there. You're going to be re-imaging machines as troubleshooting steps. We all do it today. So MDT has a killer database you can set up, and based on MAC, UID, or GUID of a machine, it can perform the exact same deployment to that box every single time. So always be thinking about re-imaging later on. What operating system do we want to add? We're going to choose Windows 7. Not going to choose a product key at this time. Organization. Let's just do tech ed. You can also put the default IE home page if you choose. Admin password. Super safe, secure password. I have a task sequence. So now, if we go into that, look at the task sequence. If I wanted to install an application, I could just choose install a single app, browse to it. Let's say we're going to do RoboCopy. If I want to install another application, I can do all kinds of adding. This time we might want to do BlackBerry Desktop. And whenever I use MDT, I do like to keep things simple. So instead of install application, I would name it BlackBerry Desktop so that you can actually see which applications are being installed. So management between WDS and MDT of your images, MDT makes your life so much easier. All you have to do is create another task sequence to perform a completely different deployment solution. And you saw how quick and easy it is to create those task sequences. So what's nice is when you integrate the two of those guys together. What you're going to get is I have a Windows 7 DVD. I've installed it on a model or reference machine, created an image of that. I've stored the image on my MDT deployment server. You do have to update the deployment share for the first time before you can use it. When you update the deployment share on MDT, it creates your MDT WinPEs. Now, these WinPEs are pretty smart. There's all kinds of MDT scripts that are injected into them, and it knows how to auto-launch the MDT deployment wizard. So you've got your MDT WinPE. You can take that, import it as a boot image into your WDS server. Then you can go to your target machines, pixie boot them, connect to the WDS server, choose your MDT WinPE. It'll boot that guy, and it's smart enough to know who the MDT server is, and you can even automate it to the extent of telling it exactly which task sequence to deploy. And you can use the database feature to tell it, whenever you hear from this client, deploy this task sequence. You hear from a different client, deploy a different task sequence. So there's all kinds of really cool stuff you can do with MDT. You can also allow MDT to use WDS as multicasting. So integrating these guys together, you get MDT pixie boot functionality for WDS, and you also can tell MDT to multicast its images out using WDS. You kind of get the best of both worlds. All right, so what we covered was a lot on installation and configuration, WDS, DHCP, DNS, WinPE problems, pixie boot issues. Talked a little bit about WDS capture and the issues you can run into with that. problems with deploying images and multicast, different types of multicast traffic, and known client settings not being recognized. And to wrap it up, and I will be giving away 2 of these training sets, I want to let you guys know I've got an article coming out in IT Pro magazine. It'll be a couple months away, but it does show you the difference between a VHD image and a WIM image, and I give you the step-by-steps on creating both and all of the options for creating them. Also, train signal. If you guys haven't been getting train signal videos, these are phenomenal. If you have not yet heard any of the authors, you can stop by their booth, and they've got some little test sessions or little kind of a taste of the author that you can grab from them and find out if you like that type of training or not. I think they have a few different authors that you can get information from. They're also doing a $1,000 daily gift card. They're going to be giving that away at the booth, and at the end of the conference, they're going to give away a $5,000 gift card, but you've got to go check in with them and get the information as to what you need to do to be able to sign up for this. You've got to tweet something, and I can't tell you what that is. So visit the booth for details on that. My website's www.deploymentdr.com, and that stands for Deployment Done Right. Usually have a lot of information out there on new upcoming technologies. And the last thing is troubleshooting resources. TechNet's got some fantastic documentation on WDS and MDT. And the last thing I'm going to ask is that you guys please fill out your evaluations. Love to come back next year, and that's kind of the way they choose who gets to come back. So please do fill out your evaluations, and there's all kinds of fun prizes you can win from that. I have 24 seconds left, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a couple names here.